This video is brought to you by Squarespace. From websites and online stores to marketing tools and analytics, Squarespace is the all-in-one platform to build a beautiful online presence and run your business. Check out Squarespace through the link in the description below. More on them in a bit. Few buildings in the world can boast the same symbolic value as today's destination. The White House, the residence of the President of the USA, belongs to a short list of buildings like the Kremlin or 10 Downing Street, which have become synonymous with the governments working inside them. As such, these addresses may evoke authority, power, freedom, corruption, or imperialism, depending on your geopolitical stance, which, of course, is none of our business. Our interest today lies with the White House as a building full of histories and stories. But fear not, we'll continue to cover the lives of the presidents themselves on our sister channel Biographics. In today's exploration, we will learn how the White House was built, how it was protected, and ultimately how it was haunted by a host of unwanted visitors. The story of how the White House came to be is linked to the foundation of the US Capitol in Washington, D.C. The decision to build a new city halfway between the commercial centers of the North and the agricultural areas of the South was a decision taken by George Washington himself. His aim was to silence pleas from political and business leaders who wanted the president to reside in their respective favorite regions. Congress authorized the location of the new capital with the 1790 Residence Act, which required the federal government to relocate from Philadelphia to the new city, Washington, D.C. President Washington tasked French architect Pierre-Charles L'Enfant to design the city, the Capitol building, and the President's house, or the Executive Mansion, as it was called then. L'Enfant's initial design was grandiose, as he envisioned a palace 4 times larger than what was eventually built. But L'Enfant did not get to realize his fantasy, as he was dismissed in February of 1792. To find a replacement, President Washington and Secretary of State Thomas Jefferson organized an architectural competition. On July the 16th, Washington examined 6 designs for the Executive Mansion. The winning architect was Irishman James Hoban, who had drawn inspiration from Leinster House in Dublin, today the seat of the Irish National Parliament. On the morning of July the 19th, 1792, Hoban kicked off surveying work with some help from George Washington himself, who was a trained surveyor after all. In fact, the president continued to oversee the construction of the house while serving his 2 terms. He requested alterations to the design, adding the rose and acorn carved motifs and reducing the building's height to the current 2 stories. It was also him who chose the type of stone to be used, sandstone, quarried from Aquia Creek on the nearby Potomac River. This material is easy to quarry and light to transport, but it's also prone to erosion in bad weather. Years later, in 1798, President John Adams would ask a team of Scottish stonemasons to whitewash the facade and sides of the building. This procedure protected it from the effects of low temperatures and gave it its characteristic color. The actual building work started on October 13, 1792, when the cornerstone was laid, never to be seen again. There is a small mystery surrounding the first building block of the White House. Several crews have looked for it, including Army engineers in 1949 and a team of X-ray operators in 1992, but nobody has been able to find it. This was not a concern for the laborers employed by Hoban and Washington, though, who toiled non-stop for several years. A vast area in what is today known as Lafayette Square was taken over by a variety of contractors and laborers, stonecutters, sawers, and carpenters who spent day after day cutting stones, sawing, and carpenting. Oh yes. Experienced carpenters and master stonemasons were rare in America at that time, so architect Hoban and the commissioners appointed by Congress had to import most of the skilled builders from Ireland and Britain. The commissioners also wanted to import less skilled workers from Europe, but response to their recruitment was disappointing. They then turned to another source of labor, African Americans. Some were free citizens, but the rest were slaves. Some of the enslaved workers were owned by the very commissioners overseeing the project, or even by the architect Hoban. The majority, however, were hired out from estates in Virginia and Maryland, a practice which brought great profits to their owners. Construction continued without major incidents, with a few exceptions. On one occasion, 4 stonecutters, who were unhappy about their wages, decided to physically threaten Hoban. Luckily, the local constables drove them out of town. The early Washington police force must have had their hands full. A parallel economy of gambling, hard drinking, and prostitution flourished around the building site. The wife of one of the carpenters, Betsy Donohue, became famous after opening an establishment described as a house of riotous and disorderly conduct. The Executive Mansion was inaugurated on November 1st, 1800. George Washington had died on December 14th, 1799, so he never got to enjoy it. John Adams was the first president to live there, but he left after losing office just 4 months later. The historical Adams family found the living conditions more suited to the fictional Adams family. There were only 6 habitable rooms, and they were cold and damp. The fireplaces were chronically out of wood, but even when blazing, they barely managed to heat up the rooms. The First Lady, Abigail Adams, did not hide her contempt for the mansion, which she showed by hanging her laundry to dry in the unfinished East Room. The next president, Thomas Jefferson, completed work on the Executive Mansion, redesigning some of its features. He did so with the help of Anglo-American architect Benjamin Henry Latrobe. Latrobe did not always enjoy the meddling and micromanagement of Jefferson, but the two collaborated well enough, making several improvements to the president's house. Latrobe added 2 wings to the building, intended for domestic residential use. He also renovated the facade by establishing the main entrance of the north side and designing the classical colonnades that are still visible today. Following Jefferson's wishes, Latrobe also landscaped the grounds, which had remained quite barren until then. He also installed a grand staircase inside the house, updated the plumbing, repaired leaking roofs, solved a drainage issue, and built a modern system of water closets. It's interesting to note that after the Revolution had liberated the former colonies from the rule of London, so many British architects and labourers were so eager to build the seat of American power. But history is, among other things, the mother of ironies and counter-ironies. What the British built, the British also destroyed. 2 years into the War of 1812, British forces marched into Washington and burned all public buildings in retaliation for the destruction of York, now modern-day Toronto, in Canada. It was August the 24th, 1814. James and Dolly Madison had already fled to safety in Maryland when the Redcoats entered the Executive Mansion. The soldiers first had a nice meal with food found in the scullery, already laid out on a formal table with the presidential dishes and silverware. They then ransacked the mansion and set it ablaze. A subsequent rainstorm made things even worse, as the cold rain falling on the burning hot walls caused them to shrink rapidly and crack. The British troops left Washington 3 days later, and the Madisons returned to survey the damage. They found that almost everything inside had been destroyed, save for some pots and pans from the kitchen. Some congressmen took the occasion to propose a move of the capital to a more developed city like Philadelphia or New York. But James Madison preferred to maintain continuity with the previous administrations and pushed to rebuild the Executive Mansion exactly as it was before. To do so, he hired the trusty James Hoban once again. 2 of Madison's successors, James Monroe and Andrew Jackson, made important additions. The south and north porticos completed in 1824 and 1829 respectively. The north portico is the one that looks like a neoclassical temple, supported by 4 rows of columns. The south portico is more iconic, with its 6 Ionic columns supporting a semicircular terrace. It's the one we see front and center when the aliens blurb the White House in Independence Day. The next major renovation of the house was conducted by the bull moose himself, President Theodore Roosevelt. In 1902, he relocated the president's offices to the newly built Executive Office Building, now known as the West Wing. Then sometime around 1902 and 1904, he had converted a ground floor office into a fully functioning dojo in which he avidly trained in judo, aikido, and jiu-jitsu under the master Yamashita Yoshiaki. But perhaps the most important renovation he applied was not born of brick and mortar, but of pen and paper. It was Roosevelt who officially changed the name of the Executive Mansion into the White House. Roosevelt's successor, William Taft, gave the world another iconic location by creating the Oval Office, now synonymous with American executive power. The White House remained largely untouched for about 50 years, with a couple of important additions by North Carolina architect Lorenzo Winslow. President Franklin D. Roosevelt was required to practice a regular swimming routine as therapy for the lasting effects of polio. After Winslow won the contract, he built an indoor heated pool, which Roosevelt described as most harmonious and agreeable to the eye. The very happy president also asked Winslow to design and build a bomb shelter connected via a secret tunnel to the Department of Treasury. When successor Harry S. Truman received reports of serious structural weakness in the White House, he commissioned the trusted architect to completely renovate the building. From 1948 to 1952, Winslow must have felt like a kid in a candy store as he totally gutted the interior and oversaw a complete renovation. In contrast, the exterior of the White House has remained basically untouched for over a century, with, well, one major exception. In order to keep the White House looking white, someone had to lay coat after coat of immaculate white paint. By President Jimmy Carter's administration, the layers were so thick that visitors couldn't see the carving details on the facade. The Reagan, Bush 41, and Clinton administrations had to fund significant decoration work to strip the excess layers. When finished, more than 45 coats of paint had been removed from the exterior walls. One of those coats may have been of a different color if a certain plan didn't come to fruition back in 1941. The Department of Defense wanted to paint the White House in camouflage to protect it from enemy airstrikes. They also wanted to have it surrounded by tanks. The result must have looked like something from G.I. Joe meets Team America, and thankfully this never took place. This was just one of the many security measures planned or executed to protect the House and its many residents. And before we continue with our story of the White House today, let me take a moment to tell you about today's fantastic sponsor, Squarespace. Now, two simple things. One, maybe you've got some idea for a website or a business that you want to start that's knocking around in your mind. And well, the second thing is the only way to figure out whether that's worth doing is to get it out there to the world. And this can be daunting because, it's scary to go and pursue new things, but not knowing how to set up a website is not an excuse. There are no excuses available with Squarespace. Squarespace allows you to create a powerful website for whatever you're up to. You want to sell something online? Sure, set up a store with Squarespace. You want to start a podcast? Yes, you can do that on Squarespace. It all starts on Squarespace with a beautiful template that you can customize to your heart's content, or you can start from scratch, or you can move over from an existing domain, making everything super easy to manage. Don't start from scratch though, just use a template. No excuses. And once you've gone through the super easy customization process, there's no updates, there's no patches, there's no tech BS to deal with. And Squarespace also handles all of that website-y stuff. Podcasts, sure. Mailing lists, yes. Social integrations also. Like I say, Squarespace removes the excuses to your dreams. Just go get it done. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/geographics to get 10% off a purchase of a website or a domain. The official website of the White House Foundation, in its section for school children, states, "The President of the United States encounters many people, and not all those individuals have good intentions." That may be an understatement considering that 4 American presidents have been assassinated, and 13 more have survived attempts on their lives. Naturally, modern presidents and their official residence enjoy one of the most comprehensive security details in the world. At the beginning, the grounds of the Executive Mansion were completely open to the public. Any Joe Blogs could take a walk inside the garden, sneak into the palace, and steal President Adams' underwear or something. In 1801, President number 3, Thomas Jefferson, asked for a fence to be erected around the gardens. He had some armed guards placed at the main gates of the fence and at the entrance to the mansion. It wasn't until August the 23rd, 1842, that President John Tyler constituted the first permanent security force at the Executive Mansion. This contingent was opposed by Congress, fearful that the president may use it as his own personal army. However, this initial army was only made up of 4 guys. Their responsibility was mainly to mingle with crowds at receptions and to spot suspicious-looking guests. This Fantastic Four was beefed up in 1853 by President Franklin Pierce, who introduced the 2-level security arrangement still in use today. The first line of defense guarded the outer perimeter of the Executive Mansion, while an inner ring of bodyguards would protect the president. 8 years later, the start of the Civil War prompted Abraham Lincoln to increase security, but he never completely closed off the mansion to citizens. Up until this point, the presidential bodyguards were provided by the Army or the Washington Metropolitan Police. The current guardian angels of POTUS, the Secret Service, came into being in 1865. At its inception, the Corps was founded by the Department of Treasury with the specialized task of arresting counterfeiters of currency. It wasn't until May 1894 that the Treasury Secretary, John G. Carlisle, allowed for the Secret Service to begin informal part-time protection of President Grover Cleveland. This arrangement was motivated by the violence and riots related to a Pullman workers' strike. Secret Service personnel took on full-time protection of the president only in 1901 after the assassination of William McKinley. His successor, Teddy Roosevelt, became the first commander-in-chief to benefit from this coverage. Although, as we've heard, he was perfectly capable of defending himself and considered his bodyguards to be a minor nuisance. As he wrote to Senator Henry Cabot Lodge, "The Secret Service men are a very small but a very necessary thorn in the flesh." In April 1917, US entry into World War I prompted the Secret Service to ramp up their operations, taking on the protection of every member of the first family. During this period, the most serious threat to President Woodrow Wilson ended up coming from a particularly violent element codenamed High, who invaded the Oval Office on more than one occasion. Hi was a temperamental ram, part of a flock of sheep that Wilson had invited to graze on the lawn of the White House in order to produce wool for the war effort. From World War I to World War II, we already mentioned the failed scheme to paint the White House in camouflage tint in December of 1941. Thankfully, this was a scheme that clashed against the good taste of Franklin Roosevelt. During the Cold War, the security detail was further increased by extending the mandate of the Secret Service over the president-elect, the vice president-elect, major presidential candidates, and even widows of presidents until death or remarriage, and their children until the age of 16. The White House was also equipped with a helicopter ready to fly the president to safety in case of an imminent nuclear attack. Nowadays, the full extent of security measures at the White House is a well-kept secret, but we can share some of the best known. The most viable measure is the outer fence, a basic protection, but probably the most effective. It's 11 feet in height, made of steel and rebar, with the top crowned in spikes to deter intruders. Should attackers make it past the fence, their presence would be spotted by a system of infrared sensors. Their range of action extends to the grounds, the sky above them, and even the earth beneath them. But what if an attacker has no intention to risk capture with a dangerous stunt? After all, the White House is a tourist attraction offering guided visits. But that doesn't mean that any assassin can just waltz into the gift shop. Tourists must register for a visit at least 21 days in advance, allowing the Secret Service to perform background checks and assign the right amount of supervision. Close-quarter attack on the first family or the White House staff is near impossible, so how about a long-distance strike like a well-placed shot fired by a sniper? In November 2011, an attacker did just that, shooting 11 rounds from a semi-automatic rifle against the White House windows. The windows barely noticed what had happened, proving that all the windows in the White House are, in fact, bulletproof. In 2013, the shooter, a 21-year-old from Idaho, pleaded guilty to lesser charges in order to avoid being charged with the attempted assassination of a president. He is currently serving a 25-year sentence. But let's get back to attacking the White House. If you're really trying to go full movie villain and money and resources are not in question, one may consider attempting a direct airstrike against the White House. And by the way, I don't want to give any strange ideas to anybody, and hello NSA analyst watching this video, do note this is just illustrative and educational. Okay, I'm also just quoting existing sources, arrest them, leave me alone. So if hypothetically some really bad people who don't like the president were to strike from the air, they would meet the wrath of Uncle Sam. Sam, as in surface-to-air missiles, that is. An urban legend claims that there is a Sam battery on top of the White House, but that would be overkill. What the White House does have is a high-tech laser system designed to spot any airborne threat from a mile out, alerting one of the several missile batteries located throughout the district. A more recent air defense measure instituted at the White House is a small fleet of drones. In January 2015, a White House employee decided to have a relaxing time at the end of his shift by playing with his new drone on the grounds of the house itself. When the drone was finally spotted, the Secret Service realized that it had flown past the aircraft detection systems quite easily. Following the incident, several drones were recruited as roving CCTV cameras, but also to counter attacks from external drones. So yes, the Secret Service really does have it all covered, but minimal chance does not mean zero chance. Just to name a few instances, in only 6 weeks in 2014, the White House security was breached 3 times. On September the 11th, 2014, a man wearing Pokemon gear and carrying a Pikachu doll climbed the fence and was apprehended on the North Lawn. Apparently, the Secret Service has got to catch them all. 8 days later, a more worrying attack took place. 42-year-old Omar Gonzalez climbed the fence, ran the lawn, and entered the main hall and made it to the East Room before finally being stopped. Gonzalez was carrying a 3.5-inch folding knife in his pocket, but luckily no one was injured. Finally, on October the 22nd, a 23-year-old man with mental health problems jumped the fence and managed to fight off 2 police dogs before being subdued. But the prize for the most elegant and successful breach goes to Michaele and Tareq Salahi, a couple of wealthy socialites from across the river in Virginia. On November the 24th, 2009, they showed up uninvited at a White House dinner and just walked in. Secret Service Director Mark Sullivan later apologized to Congress, saying that agents on duty had failed to verify if the Salahis were on the guest list. Beyond all these offenders, though, there is another class of unwanted guests that no Secret Service agent could ever hold back: ghosts. Is the White House really haunted? No. According to President Harry S. Truman, the damned place is haunted sure as shootin'. Truman was not alone in this opinion. 7 other presidents have reported stories of spectral visitors. One of the most annoying ghosts must be that of one Mr. David Burns, who was the original owner of the land where the White House sits. Reportedly, his disembodied voice has been heard in the Oval Office. His conversation is not exactly bubbly and sophisticated, as his go-to line is allegedly, "I'm Mr. Burns." Other ghosts from early administrations include that of William Henry Harrison and John Tyler. President Harrison served for only 31 days in 1841, his term being cut short by a lethal bout of typhoid or pneumonia. He was the first president to die in the executive mansion, and his spirit apparently still haunts the attic. His successor, John Tyler, has been spotted in the Blue Room proposing to his second wife, Julia Gardner. Love conquers all, apparently. But most of the ghost stories at the White House are associated with Abraham Lincoln. While still alive, Abraham Lincoln reportedly received regular visits from his son Willie, who had died of typhoid in the executive mansion at the age of 11. The First Lady, Mary Todd, had been aggrieved by the previous death of another son, Eddie, who had died at the age of 4. As a coping mechanism, Mrs. Lincoln had started hosting seances in the Red Room of the mansion. Evidence suggests that she held 8 seances, sometimes with Abraham Lincoln in attendance. These spirit sessions must have comforted Mrs. Lincoln in no small measure, as she once wrote to her half-sister that Willie lives. He comes to me every night and stands at the foot of the bed with the same sweet, adorable smile that he always has had. He does not always come alone. Little Eddie is sometimes with him. After his assassination in 1865, President Lincoln apparently decided not to leave his mansion, and many sightings have been reported by staff and VIP guests. During the first FDR administration, a woman named Mary Eban, who was an aide to Eleanor Roosevelt, reported seeing Lincoln on his bed, pulling on his boots. Her screams caused Secret Service agents to intervene. It's not reported if they also witnessed the apparition. Mrs. Roosevelt herself admitted that she could feel an unseen presence when working in her office in a 1932 speech in San Antonio. One of the best-known Lincoln sightings comes from British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, who stayed at the White House during Christmas of 1941, shortly after the US entry into World War II. While there, he slept in the Lincoln bedroom. One evening, Churchill had just stepped out of a hot bath wearing a cigar and nothing else. He was mildly surprised to see President Lincoln sitting by the fireplace. Churchill reportedly said, "Good evening, Mr. President. You seem to have me at a disadvantage." President Lincoln's ghost does not sound that frightening, as he seems happy to stand in front of windows, knock on doors, try on his shoes, or sit by the fire. A more upsetting apparition is surely that of Annie Surratt. Her mother, Mary, was accused of being one of the conspirators in Lincoln's assassination and was executed by hanging. The ghost of poor Annie is said to knock on doors at night, pleading for the release of her mother. Another unsettling presence may be that of Abigail Adams. According to existing accounts, she walks with her arms outstretched as if to grab or choke her victims. She is not the only First Lady who has outstayed her welcome, as Dolly Madison still protects the garden. From whom, you may ask? Well, you may remember that the Madisons were the presidential couple who had their house burned by British invaders. Well, an unnamed British soldier in 1810's uniform is said to roam the White House grounds holding a menacing torch. Or maybe Dolly is just looking after the integrity of the flower beds. Apparently, during the Wilson administration, she scared staff members who wanted to relocate her beloved rose garden. Now, all the ghosts we have mentioned so far have a recognizable identity or backstory, except one who still remains a mystery. He is only known as the Thing. He is the ghost of an unnamed 15-year-old boy who frightened the staff of President William Taft in 1911. Taft's military aide, Major Archibald Butt, wrote to his sister Clara, "The ghost, it seems, is a young boy, about 14 or 15 years old. They say that the first knowledge one has of the presence of the Thing is a slight pressure on the shoulder, as if someone were leaning over your shoulder to see what you might be doing." President Taft took the Thing quite seriously. He apparently ordered Major Butt to tell the staff that whoever repeated stories about the ghost would be kicked in his surname and fired. This is by no means an extensive cavalcade through the history of the White House, which has a long and rich history of trespasses, both mortal and ethereal. This is not the first presidential or royal residence we cover, and I hope it's not the last. If there's one you'd really like to see covered, you know what to do. Ask us in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and thank you for watching.